Welcome to Unconscious Evolution, Jamal. It's so great to have you here today. Let's briefly learn a little bit about Jamal. Jahmaal Marshall is a certified counselor, consultant, and podcast host. He tackles burnout at the root with proven methods to double your time and maximize productivity. Believe me, you're going to want to get in touch with Jamal after you listen and watch this podcast. So please know his contact information and social media details are all listed in the show notes. So please reach out to him, say hello, and start listening to his amazing podcast titled Listen, Then Speak. Okay, Jamal, thank you again for opening your personal life to us today. I know you do this on a regular, but it's really nice to have you here as a guest. What would you like to share with us? And has anything come up for you over the last couple of hours that you weren't expecting and that you'd love to talk to us about?
In the last couple hours, I can't say anything's come up in the last couple hours. It's been just, the normal day of business. And I've been actually enjoying some of this good weather. I don't know what time this will air, but, on the East Coast here, we've had a hurricane in the lower Southeast. And so it's kind of been a little dreary here in DC. So today, like the sun is shining and I was able to get out and get some vitamin D for 5 miles. So happy about that. But what I'd like to share, obviously, I know when I see a person's title, I'm like, well, why do you do what you do? What's the why behind your what? And why should I care? And obviously, let's be selfish and let's all be real, audience. How can it help me? That's really what we're thinking about. So we're all consumers in that sense of the word. So I think what I want to share with your audience is a bit of my story. Because when people hear the word burnout, it almost can be a lot like many of the bywords we hear in social media and now in this age of information, you know. And when there's high stress and when there's burnout, those things don't just sit by themselves. It's a lot like multi-level marketing, something some of us are good at, something some of us cannot stand. It's like a pyramid. It does not stand by itself. There's so many different things feeding that. So I'd like to share with your audience, why, what took me to that place, why I do what I do today, and what I do with clients and how it's changing lives and changing people one leader, one company at a time. So
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people, some of these folks that are listening today, they maybe have already familiarized themselves with you, and maybe a lot of these people are new, and so they haven't heard you on your podcast as a host and the really amazing conversations that you get into. And so that's what I'm really looking forward to today, is having you share more so about Jamal and what you went through, what you did, what happened in your life to get you to where you are today, and how that affects how you feel in the people that you work with. So today is about Jamal, right? And what you've learned in life, how you've got to where you are because of it.
got it. I guess I'll tell a story that, because most times when we want to do like stories like in the way you and I would think about it, it's kind of autobiographical, like let me come out of mom's womb and let's go from there. But I want to flash and frame forward a little bit to a young adult Jamal. And I know people may see the fresh face and think, well, he's probably like early 30s, late 20s. No, I'm almost 40. So I can cough and I'll turn 40. So I have some time on this planet, but we'll frame back to 27, 28-year-old Jamal, who was coming out of the government. I started my career off at the Department of Justice, off the Senate side of the Capitol, and then went into a pretty large nonprofit where I did full-time counseling. I was already a psych, major, who had graduated bachelor's of science, with honors, in counseling and psychology, and then began to train in the clinical and all of those things. And then I got put on the counseling staff. I had a full caseload, not to mention I was managing another remote program for counselors for people who couldn't come on site. So that was a lot of responsibility. And I just want to give people context for what I was doing. And while I was at this organization, we actually went through a bit of a split. So half the senior staff left, half the staff who was over me left. And you think about me being a newer staff member and having to grow in a lot of authority in a very short time. So I had to really step up to whole program coordination, to doubling my caseload. And I was also sitting in meetings that I'd never been in before, really close to the CEO and other leaders. So I got to see things that I hadn't seen before. And one day I was pulled into the office by my manager, and I was told that some of the clients there on site did not have enough access to me. And I was a little bit floored because I was always the type of employee that really made space for everyone. Part of where I lived on the campus gave people a lot of access to me. By nature, I'm an empath. And so I kind of, if I meet that person, much like when we met, I try to make them feel like they're the only person in the room that matters. But I'm also a human being of limited capacity. Um, and so when I heard this internally, I was a bit floored and taken aback. And I was like, is there some merit to what he's saying? And what exactly does he mean, by this? And I thought about all the early mornings, the late nights, sometimes being the first in the office, being the last to leave, being the one who carried the walkie talkie, being on duty, having a full caseload, not to mention going into prisons on Fridays, which was a 2.5 hour drive up to Indiana and back. I mean, just so many different things that were going on. And so I was angry at the time, but I thought, okay, there must be some merit and there's something that I need to learn in this. And that's when I had to understand that, Jamal, you have created this narrative where the moment you take a lapse, people think something's off because you're giving people too much access. And I thought to myself, even though I was already myself a counselor and had a caseload and had clients that were very successful, I still lacked good boundaries. You know, I still myself, had poor boundaries because I wanted to see everyone win to a fault. And so I had to then pull myself out of the situation, do a lot of reading, some masterminding, some counseling myself. And I had to realize, this goes back to some unresolved issues in your own childhood, where you thought, what, I'll just do it. You've played surrogate spouse in different places. So you've been told, oh, you're the man of the house. As an 8-year-old, what do you do with that type of rhetoric? Children are the greatest recorders, yet the poorest interpreters of information. And you learn certain, what we come to know as defense mechanisms that become the mechanism through which you live. And so on any job, I was always given outstanding and excellent on every performance appraisal, but I realized that my high performance was a trauma response. I felt like I had to do everything because I could not trust the adult figures in my life. And I'm not speaking of my mother at all, very dependable, very high performing woman, but I'm speaking of my dad before things had changed for him. I couldn't trust the father figure in my life. And so it's like, I have to do it. And so when you form that in your mind, you don't delegate. And when you don't delegate, you carry things alone. And there's a fear of making yourself vulnerable. And so we live, you and I, here in the DMV area in High Performance Central. That's life around here. And so a lot of what we see online and even in the community of high achievers, high performers, I can clock it as a trauma response because I've lived it. And so I had to get taken back through the ringer, already having gone through counseling, to see this is where this sits. This is where you are today. These are the neural pathways that are dug that are so familiar. And this is your coping mechanism. And so even this confrontation with the manager where it's just like, wait a minute, I think you're running me a load of crap. This is a moment, I like to call it a moment where the stars align, or a kairos moment where, what can I learn from this? And how can I use this to level up? And so it was a great time to level up for me, to then develop trigger awareness, because something he said triggered something to me.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
want your audience to hear this. Number one, develop trigger awareness, because it can be the onset for a powerful life change, not just for your business uh, and your brand, but for yourself personally and professionally.
Yes, absolutely. And you're actually leading into what I want to ask you about. So you were working and you experienced this trauma response, this trigger response at work. How were you navigating this in your personal life? Because you and I both know it's not just at work. I mean, these feelings that we have, these responses that come out, they're invited on, from different experiences in our life. So how are you recognizing then that you were having responses in your personal life, and how did that feel?
I started to notice that, one, being in the friend group, I was usually always the youngest. it wasn't until I was in my probably mid 30s, maybe late 20s, where I started to have some friends that were my age. Most of my friends when I was like 16 were in their 40s to mid 40s. For I don't know why that was that design. I
I
just
mean,
always
that's a crucial age gap at that time.
it's a very crucial age gap. But I noticed that people who were more than twice my age confided in me, and I always had actionable, practical, applicable advice that worked to give them. Because I never wanted to be a counselor at first. I wanted to be a fireman. I know it sounds funny. I wanted to be a fireman, and then when I did DC street law, I wanted to be a prosecuting attorney. So, what I do today is far cry from what I wanted to be. Um, and I noticed also in the friend group, being an empath and being highly intuitive, people can pick up on that. You kind of become the shoulder to lean on, the voice of reason, the advisor. And I, for a while, prided myself on that because it's something that I could control. Because as a child, things in the house growing up, people may not know, but my dad was a crack and heroin addict and an alcoholic. Very functioning, though. He always kept a job. And so growing up in that much chaos and disarray, it's like we find what we can control.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a narrative that I could control, where I was a great listener, great communicator, and I could listen to people and repeat back to them and even find solutions. But I had problems making myself vulnerable because I feared rejection.
Mm-hmm.
And so even the rejection of saying no. So if somebody needed something or somebody called, I was always available, because if there was any time where I wasn't available, I felt like maybe this could be the end of a thing. And with children being the greatest in recorders, everything in their world is a five alarm fire. And
Mm-hmm.
so with these things that were triggering me, there were all these five-alarm fires going off because I still had that very young child Jamal trying to process, is this how you deal with people? I just wanted to feel safe. And that safety had created a narrative that followed me well into adulthood. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, it does. It does. And what's interesting is you you spoke about wanting to be a fireman when you were younger. And in my mind, it's really not that far off from being a counselor, because it's service oriented. It's let me help you, let me save you, let me take care of you, get you to safety, right? So now
Mm.
the lawyer position, the attorney position maybe is very different, but even then, no, because you're there to protect the people that need protection. So it's interesting. You really didn't go that far off with your career and doing what you're doing. And it is so interesting that by you taking on that role, which eventually became a trigger, to be the sounding voice, right? That you were the one that everybody came to, and that kept you in control, and you were able to feel strong in that. It's like, I'm doing the job, as you mentioned, because at that time you did not have the male role model that you were hoping for in your life, and so you became that person, not only for yourself, for everybody else. And so then there's like a control aspect to that too, because like you mentioned, you're you are then hiding from vulnerability, because if you become vulnerable, well, who's going to be there for you?
Mm, there you have it.
Yep.
There you have it. People who are high, I call them high functioning codependents, because that's just call it what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that typically is the way that they will function. They present very well. They present very fluidly. Even on their jobs, they're known as the star player. If they're a guy, they may be known as the stud. If they're a female, it's like she's the one that's who she is, my 5-star employee. Even if they're a manager, they're known as like the best manager, the best VP, the best senior leader, the best middle manager. They they're your rock star.
Mm-hmm.
But most of it, and I don't want to say all of it because that would be overgeneralizing, but most of it is a trauma response, because they always have to be on.
Yep.
And so when we talk about this for work and also personally, I feel like I can never have an off day, because being an empath and being very sensory, and it's one, my face is very expressive. It's like if I'm happy, then everybody's happy. If I look a little melancholy, people tend to take that on. And so it's weird. I didn't ask for that type of essence or to bring that type of control, but when you're very sensory, people can sense that, and they typically match that. So it's like, well, let me I don't know if I can be vulnerable, because this may bring everything down. And so I feel like I always need to be on.
Yeah.
And you're living your truth, because we hear that word a lot today in social media, but you're not living the truth.
Right.
Two are very different.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I love that you talked about how, because you are an empath and just the person that you are, the man that you are, based on your expression, that people will end up wearing that emotion. So if you're appearing tired and not into it, that then your other, whoever is talking with you, engaging with you, might then automatically take that on. And that's so interesting because to me, that means that they're coming to you to change their mood. It's like, oh, Jamal always knows he's going to cheer me up. He's going to be this. It's like they put you on this a pedestal essentially when yes, you are extremely educated. You are absolutely amazing at what you do. You're an outstanding counselor. You just do such beautiful work, but there's so much that those folks are putting in you to wear their own emotions. And that's got to be hard sometimes too, because what you do, it's not to feed other people how to feel. It's for them to come to their own awareness and their own awakenings and dig through those traumatic situations and the triggered situations. So it's really interesting that you say do you still feel like that's something that you balance?
I would say for anybody who's a counselor, coach, consultant, and in the wellness space who does the work we do, honesty is the best policy. I know that sounds trite because I know we hear those words so much. And the perfectionists, each one of us, even if we're very far down the line, are still in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And there are still things that trigger that emotion to go back to what is safe. I explain all the time, and you well know, I built a global brand unwittingly, just walking through the woods in DC in sweaty Under Armour and just talking into my Google Pixel. Now, here in the DC area, this is not lower Tennessee. This is in Texas. This is in the mountains in Montana. The snakes will go away from you. They will not come to you. You guarantee that. And so I'm not really worried so much about them. But if I see one coiled up, I will just naturally capitulate because I don't want to be bitten. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I don't know if it's sunbathing. I don't know what it may be doing. And so the brain has already got neural pathways dug to say, do whatever you can do to keep yourself safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to, at times, even with all the training, all the counseling that I've gone through, and all the things I've taken other clients through, I still have to go back to those basics at time and rebuild that foundation because the brain still, even with the neuroplasticity that's been changed, it can still revert to what is safe because the coping mechanisms that have been in our life for years take time
Yep.
to go away and take time to be refined.
Yep. Oh my God. That's why we hear and why you and I say that the journey never ends. There is no real arrival except for I've just arrived at another awareness sensory. I've just arrived at learning something else about what holds me back or a trigger or, something that I'd never realized was a trauma experience. And so the journey is forever. And I think a lot of people get confused or they create these expectations that, well, I read this self-help book, so I should be good. Like I realize that I do this. I have too many expectations, so I'm good. That is just barely touching the surface, scratching the surface. And, so I talk about that because you work so much with people that are burnout and helping people work through their burnout and prevent burnout. Burnout goes so much deeper than just the word burnout that people have worked too hard. There's a reason why they've worked that hard, right? It's not just, oh, I felt so much stress at work, I better commit more hours. It's not that. So knowing that the journey that you and I know and a lot of other people know that it's ongoing, and that's why it's so incredibly rewarding because we're always learning. It's always benefiting from staying curious. So how do you approach that with burnout when people want a fix?
One, with a prospect or a client, is being honest up front. We know, especially in the entrepreneurial community, even in the career community, you're still selling something,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're B2B, B2C, whatever it may be. And from a prospect standpoint, I would say run from anyone who is guaranteeing something that sounds too good to be true.
Mm-hmm.
When someone says, hey, I just want you to read, and we'll hand out a little freebie after this is over. It'll be in the show notes. But if you read my freebie, that'll solve all the problems. It's like a lot of these things are just a primer.
Mhm.
One thing I say to my clients, I'm not going to shame you for your coping mechanisms because they have been in your life for years. We are literally digging through years. People wonder why is there usually for my clients to get the greatest results 6 months, but I've had ones that get amazing results in 3 months because it takes 90 days to change the initial neuroplasticity of your brain. That whole 21 days to good habits is bullcrap and it is not scientifically backed. Let me just
Thank you.
qualify that and put it out there. And so I'm honest right away, with prospects, letting them know this is a journey. We just watched the 2024 Olympics. I know everyone may admire the Knowles, the Shakaris, and the different people who are doing the 100-meter sprints. But for those who, most of the Kenyans and the people from other countries that are running the whole marathon
Mhm.
and the cross country, that's kind of what this race is really like. It's not a gunshot and then it's over. It takes time. And if you think about, I deal with clients in three versions. I'm going to deal with childhood you, I'm going to deal with teenage you, young adult you, and adult you, because those are 3 to 4 different versions of the same person that's had different beliefs.
Right.
And if you think that that takes, the quick fix of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or even just reading a book, there are so many different roots and subconscious beliefs to dig through. I often say the work is not sexy. If you turn any tree upside down or the most beautiful plant, it's like, what is that ugly thing? That is the root.
Yep.
So we got to do the ugly work. You deal with the root, the fruit will take care of itself. I'm telling you, I'm living it. I've done this for over 16 years and over 11 years in practice with clients who are living it. But you got to do the work. So that's my honest answer to your question.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of that journey. Okay. I'm 53. I'm just a little bit older than you. And I recently, just this summer, realized that I was fighting accepting what I could not control in life. Right. And I was forced to accept it. I had no choice. As you know, my dog died unexpectedly. A lot of my listeners know this by now. And the only way to get me from stage 1 to stage 2 of my grief process was to accept that she was not coming back, which is really, really hard, right? When your heart is broken. But it wasn't about Maya as much as it was about other parts of my life. That fear, that inability, that, well, what's going to happen if I accept this? How am I going to feel? Because when I accepted it, I accepted so many other things in my life. It was like this natural, like stepping into a waterfall and just getting under the waterfall and having it wash everything of me within, minutes. But it wasn't minutes. You and I both know it's not minutes. And
Right.
listeners, it's not minutes, it's years. But so at 53, that was a huge awakening, a huge evolution for me. Can you think of something in your life that you have come to realize? I mean, we could just say in the last, so many years, that you thought to yourself, wow, I kind of thought I was through that, but wow, now I just walked over a few more layers of that. Can you share any of those with us?
Quite a few of those. But I would say one thing, one constant in the life of each of us and your listeners is that actually three is change, transition, and loss. That is one of the ugly facts of the fallen world we live in. There will be life transitions, there's going to be life changes, and there's going to be losses. And with grief, especially with the loss of a parent, I had to accept that I was not in control. I could do everything I can. I could ask the doctors every question I can, but at some point he was going to go. I didn't mention that. But long 12 years before he passed, my dad became my best friend. The conversation hasn't gone in that direction, but we were knit very tight, and so that journey of grief, uh, especially in the first couple of years, was really really tough. And I had to accept that he wasn't exactly living; he was existing in the state that he was in.
Mm.
Um, But I would say, going back to answer your question, as much as we try, and really want your audience to hear this, you cannot control what other people think of you and how they see you and how they perceive you. As one who is a super sensory empath, you can drive yourself crazy trying to be everyone's version of you that they have in their head. Stop it.
Yep.
And when you make peace with that, you're free to live the life that God called you to live. You're talking to a free man because, I mean, both you and I are active in the social media space. You know, um, it would have been 40,000. I actually cut off 9,000, followers. Not personally, I didn't cut anybody off. I just prayed and shaved off 9,000 connections that were just kind of dead connections. And then I just kind of slowly been building from there. But I realized when I post something, 30 different people will receive it 30,000 different ways. That's a lot to try to control and a lot to manage. And so I don't even let my mind go there of what are all these people thinking. Some may listen, some may shun. And personally and professionally, people have a version of you that they want in their mind. You cannot meet that expectation. And that's part of, even when you're a high performer or a high achiever, you are trying to achieve something that is a fallacy and you will run into a brick wall.
Yep. You will. You absolutely will. So you shared with us already about how you had to realize your trigger, right? Your trauma. And that was showing up for everybody all the time, no matter what, being super Jamal. So, and then you also talked about grieving for your father, that you had to accept something in him. Well, was there something you had to accept in yourself to work past that? Because you could accept him, but then there was something in you that was keeping you from accepting him.
Oh, that could be a whole other podcast, to be honest. I mean, uh, we had a heart to heart back in 2006. And I learned a lot about him, that my own birth grandfather paid my paternal grandmother to abort him, but she wouldn't. And so, my dad grew up being one of the oldest, having to take care of 7 siblings that were not his children. So he always loved his children, but he didn't know how to show it. And his coping mechanism was drugs and alcohol. It didn't make me feel sorry for him when he shared these things with me, but it endeared me to him.
Yeah.
It made him human.
Yeah.
And my dad, and I know you and I both have audience that have different beliefs. He was never a person that believed in anything. I remember he had wrecked the car in a really bad accident, and he said, "I thank my lucky stars." And we're people of faith. At least most of my family is Christian. But the moment when he gave his life to Christ, his life changed. I can definitely say that. And I understand people may say the universe, whatever you guys say. I'm a Christian unashamedly. Um, it was a change in him where I can say it wasn't religious because my dad just wasn't that type of person.
Mm-hmm.
James Marshall was, unlike my mom, who's very proper like, my dad was a man from the streets. And so I knew when I saw and witnessed a change in him, I was just like, wow. But I still had a lot of my own bitterness with him to contend with, having grown up a lot faster than I should have. And so I went away for 13 months, of counseling. I do what I do today, but I invested thousands of hours and tons of dollars into. I would never encourage someone to make an investment I haven't made. And I had a lot, I did this when I was 24, 25. And so you got to think those are some formative years for a young man. I had a lot to work through to get to the place where I could see him not just as human, but see him as someone who I held nothing against. And also him owning his part in the life of us children. So I can say for your audience, one thing that's helped me to grow in confidence is that my worst enemy became my best friend. So before he died, the very confidence that a father puts in his son, you can tell, Christine, I don't have pick me energy. I've picked me. God picked me. I'm good if you don't. Um, that is the fuel that fires listen and speak. That's the fuel in the tank that keeps me going.
Tell our listeners a little bit about Listen Then Speak, because a lot of people, I mean, of course, there are so many different types of podcasts out there, and they're all very different conversations, different topics. But what I love about yours is the combination of just true core heart people, right? Talking about work or talking about their life passion or talking about the most difficult times in their lives, but somehow bringing it back to, how that matters so much in how we show up in life or how we show up at work and how we show up for other people. And so I would just love for you to share just a little bit about, what led you to start that podcast and why you've just been so passionate about it.
I never wanted to be a podcaster. Uh, like I shared with you, my story unwittingly happened where I wasn't on social media before 2020, which is one reason why people say, "Why don't you post every day?" It's like, well, because I've used to living most of my life offline
Mhm.
for until I was like, what, 35, 36. I'm not used to putting every aspect of my life online. Um, so I just started putting videos on a platform called LinkedIn. I knew nothing about LinkedIn, about the algorithm, and people started watching these videos. And a group called the Safety Justice League reached out to me and said, "Hey, come on our podcast. We want to talk to you." And I'm like, at this point, I'm working a full time job at in investigations, and my thing says global lead because that's what I was. So I'm just like, okay. I go on this podcast. There's three guys and a girl, Abby Ferry, and she says, "Are you a podcast host?" I said, "No, I don't really get down with that." She said, "You should be because you're a natural." A group in Pennsylvania who actually sponsors my web space said, "Hey, we heard you and you really have a gift and we want to sponsor you a web space and a domain. You do what you want with it." That's where Listen and Speak was born.
Wow.
So one thing led to another. I had a guy who was mentoring me on McLean, and he said, "I want you to check your mail." I said, "What's down there?" It was actually a mic, this mic that I'm speaking on. He says, and he got me a subscription at Simplecast, and he says, "You're a natural at this. You need to actually keep doing this." He actually ended up being the first guest I had on, five-time best-selling author, used to be a career person at Xerox, then went on to be an extremely successful entrepreneur. Um, and he had done thousands of interviews. I was super nervous. I interviewed him, and he says, I want you to call me. I have some feedback for you." Of course, I'm super nervous. And
Right.
he's like, "I've done thousands of these, and I would put you in my top 20. You have a way of drawing something out of people that other people just don't ask me these questions." And I think it was my years of experience as a counselor that kind of gave me an in to know, like, I'm not really concerned about what people do. I live in DC. Everybody's talking about what you do. I want you
Mhm.
to tell me who you are, and that'll give me some insight. We'll put what you do in the show notes. We'll sell your product in the show notes, but
Right.
tell me who you are, and that'll really endear you to my audience, which was just really, there was a non-existent audience at first, and I'm surprised that Listen and Speak has grown to be a top 3% global podcast, which is kind of crazy.
It's amazing. I mean, it's well deserved because it is. Every single episode with every interview. It's just compelling. I mean, I remember when I was following you like real time, and I'm like, "When's the next episode coming? I can't wait to hear the next episode." And I also had the extreme privilege of meeting you in person, as you mentioned earlier, that we met the summer of 2023 in DC. And I mean, we probably wouldn't be here if we didn't meet that one day. And I don't even think we had an opportunity to give each other more than 5 minutes of our time because it was a networking event and we were all talking to each other. But yet, you know what? I truly believe in, and I know you do too, that certain energies just attract to each other. And there was just an innate sense in us both that it's like, okay, this is a person that, yeah, I can count on them. They're amazing. They're going to teach me. They're going to walk with me and they're going to celebrate me. And I know for sure that's what I hopefully have done for you.
So far, so good. So far, you're batting 1,000. Um, yeah. The weird thing is that there were three people who I already knew coming into that, and the rest, everyone was just fresh. And the relationships that have come out of that so far have been such a blessing. You just never know who's in your backyard. And I think just even, out of all the people there, I'd known Sejal the longest, and she was on my podcast. I'd actually been to her home out in California. But, she and I both, if you think about Listen and Speak, we have different beliefs. We have different backgrounds, different faiths. I have clients that are atheist, agnostic, Muslim, Buddhist, Christian, the span of Christendom, or maybe some believe nothing at all. And part of Listen and Speak is I want to get to know who you are. You don't have to walk, talk, and act like me for me to save and have space for you.
Yeah.
That's the magic of it. And hopefully, when I speak of my faith, people experience the best part of that.
Yeah. I love that. Spirituality is very individualistic. And, one of the best things we can do is always keep our minds open without shutting the door just because it's not in our belief circle, right? I mean, there's so much. Well, Jamal, I would love for you to say any of your last parting thoughts to share with our listeners. And of course, I'm so grateful to have had you here. And I know it's late in the afternoon, and but you're a good friend and you're a wonderful guest. So, what would you like to leave our guests with today?
I'll leave you with three things. One, and Christine and I already talked about it, develop trigger awareness. Please remember that. And I know it's not easy to do that. That's some of the stuff I do one on one with clients, because you're not just going to develop it. Learn how to develop trigger awareness. Two, find a different escape route. We are used to, we talked about triggers and the way that we react to them. When you find a different escape route, you learn how to come up with an informed response instead of an uninformed reaction. Three, understand how you think. Each one of us processes intel differently. When you begin to understand how you think, it definitely will inform the way you act. And understand that no matter what you know, what you believe will always inform your behavior. So those are just three takeaways I want for your audience. And I'll leave you with this. I was dealing with a client who works at a Fortune 500, and we were finishing up their offboarding meeting, and they came to me with a lot of workplace trauma. And during the offboarding, they were sharing all the takeaways of our time together, and we measure progress. If I don't get your results, I shouldn't be doing this. And it hit me in the moment. I said, because they manage a lot of different teams, they're a senior leader. I said, because of the work we've done together, all the teams you manage, they won't have to heal from you like you've had to heal from other leaders. And to see this very senior leader's face flood with tears, it was just one of those amazing moments. And they leaned in, they did the unsexy work. And to just see the results that they're getting, and where they sit in the organization and the effect that they're having, the ripple effect throughout their organization, is just amazing. So it's fulfilling for me to get to do what I do.
I'll tell you, the work, it works. The work works when you dedicate your time, because you do. I mean, you and I talk about this. It requires dedication. It's commitment. The coach, the counselor is not going to do the work for you. We're here to pull things out of you and to help guide you, but you have to do the work. And so when you do, it's extremely rewarding. And I love that share. Thank you so much. And Jamal, thank you so much again for being here today. And listeners, I hope you really enjoyed Jamal. He's unavoidable to enjoy. But again, he talked about a freebie that's in the show notes, and his contact information is in the show notes. So reach out to him. And until next time, enjoy yourself, enjoy the moment, and try to discover what your unconscious evolution is.